All right, good day. It is August 26th, 2022. And for us in northern, northeastern Ohio, northwestern Ohio, I think August has completely been deflation. We've had weather that's like, hey, this is pretty nice. And so for those of you who have embarked on an establishment, now you're kind of going, well, will it rain anytime soon? If you've put seed down already, if you have irrigation, you're probably like, hey, this is working pretty nicely. Online today, we've got Dr. Dave Gardner, Ms. Pamela Sherratt, and Dr. Dave Shetlar to talk about a range of turfgrass issues. First up this morning, the inimitable Pamela Sherratt.
Good morning, everybody. It's a beautiful day here in Columbus, Ohio. I wanted to talk a little bit about Poa trivialis. So Poa trivialis, as we know, is a cool season grass. It has that apple green, Granny Smith apple green color in the spring. It creates these patches. It's a perennial, so it creates these big patches, and it grows in people's lawns. I see it frequently on baseball outfields, people's lawns, athletic fields that are overly wet, maybe some shade. It prefers those conditions. It's got some good attributes as far as a turf grass, in that it can germinate at low temperatures, it can withstand the shade, it can grow in moist conditions. Unfortunately for us in amenity sports turf, where we're looking to use our grasses, it doesn't have any heat tolerance, and it has virtually no wear tolerance. It's extremely shallow rooted, no wear tolerance. And so typically what happens in central Ohio is that it will start to go dormant in June, July, when we get high temperatures, when the soil temperatures are above 80 and we get air temperatures above 90, it will go dormant. It puts all of its energy resource into stolons at that point rather than shoot growth. And so the shoots will kind of melt out. It creates this patch of musty smelling, dead looking grass. And I get several phone calls this summer where people think they have disease when it is in fact just patches of Poa trivialis going dormant. So I'm used to seeing this in June and July. What I'm not used to seeing this is in August. And so I noticed in my personal lawn yesterday that my patches, I know where my patches of Poa trivialis are, and I noticed that they've completely they've collapsed in the last 48 hours. And so I visited a couple of athletic fields that I know were irrigated last night. My local football field is a hotbed of Poa triv usually. I have been called out to there before, just before football season started, when it has in fact been Poa triv, not disease, and saw the same thing. And so I didn't know, I'll share a picture with you guys. So this is what is happening. So these large patches of Poa trivialis are going dormant. And if you look at the picture on the right, there's all kinds of stuff going on. You can see in the bottom left-hand corner that there's some rust there on the perennial ryegrass. If you zoom in closer, you'll actually see some leaf spot going on. But this is what the Poa trivialis in my yard looks like right now. It's starting to collapse. It's creating that mat laying down. And so, I had this question, well, is it disease, or has it got something to do with the massive rain event that we had last week? We had 2 or 3 days here in central Ohio where we had massive rain events, flooding, we had flood advisories, it was very warm. Did that cause disease issues, or did we get sort of a wet wilt? I hate to use that term because I know that's usually something that we talk about on bent grass putting greens, very short grasses, but I do wonder if the weather had some kind of involvement in what we're seeing with the Poa trivialis last night. And so I reached out to a couple of colleagues, and I actually reached out to our turfgrass pathologist, Todd Hicks, and I sent him these pictures, and I didn't give him any more information. I said, just tell me what you think's going on here. And he said, well, there's a little bit of rust, and I do see a little bit of dollar spot. But to me, it looks like a lot of the Poa trivialis samples that I've had coming into me this week. So Todd's had these samples coming into him also. So I'm going to run a sample over to Todd on Monday. And we'll see if it is just dollar spot or whether it's somehow the rain event has had some kind of effect on the way that Poa trivialis is acting right now. One of the interesting things when I was delving a bit deeper last night is that there's been quite a lot of studies done with applying fungicides to Poa trivialis to see if it can get it through that stress period. And there have been some non-target effects, i.e. the turf grasses didn't have disease, but there's some kind of non-target effect going on. I had something similar to a research project that I did years ago, where I applied fungicide during an establishment study to see if it had an effect on disease incidence at the seedling stage, and it didn't. I didn't get disease, but it did have a non-target effect. And I just guessed, I just guessed that it was something to do with suppressing pathogens in soil, maybe. The research that I've been looking through with PoaTriv suggests that maybe it's more hormonal, that these non-target effects are somehow linked to hormonal changes in the plant with things like delaying leaf senescence. So I thought that was really interesting. Anyway, so that's probably more than you wanted to know about Poa trivialis today, but I thought I'd just share that with you, that that's something that's happening in Columbus at least. And then I wanted just to give a quick plug to the Sports Turf Managers Field Day coming up in 2 weeks in Perrysburg. I've got myself registered. I'm looking forward to seeing everybody. It's going to be a great event. It's come out and support the local sports turf managers group, network with friends, and learn some sports turf tips. So, Ed, that's all I have right now.
Thanks, Pam. One question, I guess, from the standpoint of what fungicide did you use and what was the non-target? So that was 2 questions. Cheeky of me.
So the fungicide, I used 2 fungicides at the time. I used a granular subdue and I used Heritage. And I saw effects from both. And it was the summer. I repeated it in the fall and I didn't see the same effect. But I did it twice in the summer and and the non-target effect that I saw was faster establishment, darker green, denser. And I actually sent samples away and there was a 0.5% greater amount of nitrogen in the leaf tissue.
Interesting. Maybe opened up a debate or a can of worms. Dr. Gardner.
All right, good morning, everybody. Today I was going to talk a little bit about seedling establishment. It is that time of the year, right? So if you've got areas where you need to renovate the surface, this is the time to do that. So Kentucky bluegrass anytime now until September 15th, and then all of our other turf species we generally recommend until September 30th. Now, I see people throw seed out in October and even the first or second week of November and the following spring. Occasionally that looks okay. But if you're trying to maximize the chances that you're going to have a successful establishment, these are the dates that we generally recommend that you have your seed mixes in by. So again, Kentucky bluegrass by September 15th, because it takes a little longer to germinate an establishment or establish, and then all of the others by September 30th. Now, that means that, if you have, usually if you're reseeding, it's because you have a lot of things growing that you didn't want to have growing there, so weeds for which we don't have selective herbicides. And so if you have things like orchard grass, quackgrass, and et cetera, that you need to get out of that stand first, now is the time to do that. Use glyphosate and make that application 1 to 2 weeks prior to the date on which you're going to do the seeding. Now, I hear of folks that will put out glyphosate the day before they put their seed down, which isn't what the label says, so you're not supposed to do that. But sometimes people will get away with that because, remember, glyphosate binds really tightly to the soil particles, and so it's then not available for subsequent biological activity. The reason that they have that buffer in the label is because people tend to over-apply their products, right? And if you over-apply glyphosate, then you won't have enough binding sites on the soil, and you'll have glyphosate in the soil water solution, which will mess up your seedlings when they try to germinate. So that's the reason that you have that time period on the label. So again, 1 to 2 weeks prior to seeding is when you should put out the glyphosate. Here's my plug for it. It's not a bad idea to make sure you incorporate the seed because, as Pam was talking about, we tend to have large rainfall events these days, and that's a good way of redistributing your seed from being fairly uniform to looking something like this. And so incorporating the seed is a good idea. Also, you should apply a mulch. There's a couple of ways that you can do that. You can get this blue fiber mulch. Now, this is actually a picture of a hydroseeding, but you can get this blue fiber mulch that you can apply, just by hand as a dry material. That costs more, but it's generally a better idea because if you use straw or hay, what tends to happen is that straw or hay will have as a contaminant the seeds of things like wheat, which isn't that big of a deal because you can mow that and eventually it will go away, but also the quackgrass and the orchard grass that you just tried to get rid of with the glyphosate. And so you can save some money with straw, but then you run the risk of having the exact same problem that you were trying to solve with the establishment anyway, perhaps. The other thing I would say is that if you were establishing in an area where you have a history of significant weed pressure, especially from winter annuals, not necessarily from crabgrass, because that's not germinating right now, but if you have a significant history of weed pressure, then you can consider the use of mesotrione, tenacity, for example, at 5 to 8 fluid ounces per acre. And the way that you do that is you incorporate the seed, then you spray the tenacity over the top, then you put the mulch down, then you start watering. And that can be highly effective. You can usually get, 90 to 100% reductions in your weed stand by doing that. As far as irrigation goes, one thing that I see at this time of year is that folks will think that they can get away with putting the seed down and then depending on the surface area that they're establishing, come in with a 10,000 gallon tanker truck and then, irrigate the area with that. And what I would say is make sure you do the calculation so that you know how much area you can actually irrigate out of a truck. It's a better idea to just make sure that you have irrigation available. And especially with an August establishment, you still need to probably irrigate to keep that top surface layer uniformly moist. You're probably going to need to do that 2, maybe 3 times a day, depending on the weather conditions that we have. That backs off to, by the time you get to mid-September, you can get away with irrigating once in the middle of the afternoon and the soil will remain uniformly moist. But, the better you are capable of leaving the soil moisture uniform during that establishment period, the better your establishment is going to be. So, again, something else to consider during the establishment. And that's what I have for today, which actually had absolutely nothing to do with weeds. So I don't know why I called it a weed update.
Terribly obtuse and not valuable at all, David. Don't worry. Very good stuff. Dr. Shetlar, can you follow that up something related to insects or not?
Well, it's like Pam said, there's not much going on here other than weed stuff. I did have a kind of a question. I've got as we all know, the Columbus City Schools don't have much funding, but they do have some really low maintenance athletic fields. And there's one of these schools pretty near my home. And what they call their athletic fields, which is nothing more than areas that they mow on a regular basis, is probably 50% crabgrass. And I was wondering what your opinion would be. Could they just slit seed through that crabgrass because it's going to go down anyway, and then use a pre-emerge next year to try to get the crabgrass germinating? Would that possibly give them a better stand of turfgrass than the 50% crabgrass that they've got right now?
What the interesting question is has the crabgrass already set seed for the year, or is it still doing so? If it's already done seeding and the damage is done, then yeah, I would say go ahead, slit seed in, let the crabgrass be your mulch. But if it is still actively attempting to produce seed heads, then what you said, I think would work, but the crabgrass would also be contributing to next year's potential future problem too.
Yeah. Most of it that I've looked at right now is pretty mature.
Okay.
And, obviously,
but the other point I would make there, though, from Dave Shetlar's standpoint, is if someone does split seed in, at least don't put down pre-emerge, right? So the problem you have, Dave Gardner, with the seed being set into the seed bank, you can take a look at that in the spring, while your preferred species would have hopefully germinated and done something during the fall, right? Is that
sure?
Look at it.
Yeah. Okay. But yeah, I think my point was if the crabgrass is still actively seeding, then it wouldn't germinate this fall, but it would be contributing to next year's weed pressure. But if it's already done and the damage is done, as it were, then yeah, I would say go ahead and just seed right into it.
Okay. The only thing that I wanted to mention is that Pam had mentioned that we did have a significant rain event this last week. And the day after that, I got several emails from people wondering what all these ants were. And remember that the so-called turfgrass ant, Lasius neoniger, is one of those that releases swarmers in the late summer, early fall. And this is the time. Usually it occurs in late August through mid-September. We get a rainfall event, the rain suddenly stops, and then we either get a kind of a really humid evening, or the next day might be a sunny evening, and all of a sudden there are just thousands of these swarmers. In this picture, you could see the little worker ant here, and then here would be a potential queen, the large reproductive. These ants, if we want our talk about bug sex today, these swarmers actually do what we call a nuptial flight. The females take flight, the males actually grab a hold of the females in flight. They mate. The males, once mating is done, drop to the ground and die, and the mated females then dig into the soil to try to establish a new colony. And that's where the trouble comes in, primarily on golf courses, is that when these new mated females land on the greens and tees, they'll throw up just a little tiny mound of soil. And golf course superintendents often panic about that. Normally this event occurs in 1 or 2 nights after a rain. It's nothing to worry about. Your morning mowing should get rid of it. 99.9999% of these new queens or new reproductives are unsuccessful because the established ants don't tolerate them. They'll seek them out, kill them, and get rid of them. But they are a nuisance, usually for a couple of nights. I've had a lot of people panic and they'll apply a pyrethroid. That doesn't seem to do anything. The ants dig through that little pyrethroid barrier without feeding and don't pick up a dose to kill them. But again, they'll disappear on their own in pretty short order.
I knew, Dr. Shetlar, you'd be a good man for death and destruction. There was someone was not talking about it enough, so I did not like you to come in with some of that. From the standpoint of other pest problems, so we have had a little bit of rust show up here on campus, particularly on some of our older ryegrass areas. We won't be treating it, but as it continues to dry and stay dry, you're probably going to see a little bit more of that on the older ryegrass cultivars. Kind of more aesthetic than anything else, where we see problems with rust as a potential issue for needing fungicide treatment might be on newly seeded areas. Dollar spot and red thread have also returned, as Todd had tweeted out during the week, and we've seen that up here in Worcester as well. The other one that we did come across this week, probably a little bit of a weird one, was we also saw some brown patch showing up on our research green, which temperatures getting onto the cooler side for it. The only thing is, when you look at soil temperatures, they're still up in the mid to upper 70s. Our averages for the last 10 days have gone as low as 73, but as high as 77. So we're still in a situation where we're not getting a lot of cool down in the soil profile. It's not in a dangerous territory, but it's still allowing a lot of problems to manifest. Forecast is promising, I would say, from our standpoint up in the northern part of the state. It has to come back and bite us in the rear end. That's the only thing I'm kind of worried about. September may turn into 150 degrees blazing hell, but we've had a good August, so we'll have to take the wins. A couple of other things, the OTF scholarship outing is coming up in early October and then in mid-October. You may have seen the ATI scholarships coming up as well. And there is the field day that Pam has coming up. OTF is also coming up in December, and we have, I think, one of the strongest lineups I've seen for a long time. We're extremely excited about all the tracks. We've got business school on the Monday morning. We've got baseball 101. Hopefully I'm putting the cart before the horse, Pam, there. On Monday, there are 2 pre-conference workshops. Our EM track includes a shop tour out to Muirfield. And we've got speakers coming in from all over the country. Dr. Michelle DeCosta is coming in from the Northeast. Dr. Mike Richardson is making an appearance. Steve McDonald's coming in. And so we have that, along with panels that include the likes of Noah Irvin, Keith Christina, and a host of other people, including Greg Boring, who's coming in from Baltusrol to talk as well. So looking forward to promoting the hell out of it, and also looking forward to seeing everybody turning up, because the reason we put these conferences and education events together is to see all of you, to help you with your problems. To follow up finally with that, we do have Turf Team Times Live coming up, not next Friday, but the Friday after. Dr. Shetlar said he was going to be busy in retirement. I don't know what that means for Dr. Shetlar, but it's Labor Day weekend, so the rest of us will blame Dr. Shetlar for that next weekend. So the weekend after, Turf Team Times Live, keep an eye out for that. With all of that waffling now done, I will say thank you, enjoy the weekend, and we will talk to you all next week.